A tiny sleep woke a giant heart. The early morning fell over the city like a dark velvet mantle, barely speckled by the yellowish lights of street lamps flickering with weariness. The February cold bit with sharp teeth, and the empty streets seemed to whisper secrets that only the night knew. In the midst of that frozen silence, a latest generation black Mercedes-Benz crossed the deserted avenues, driven by a man whose presence commanded respect even in solitude. Karim Al-Rashid was not an ordinary man. At 42 years old, he had built a business empire that extended across 3 continents. CEO of Al-Rashid Industries, his name appeared regularly on lists of the world's most influential businessmen. With roots in the Middle East and education at Europe's finest universities, Karim had learned to combine the ancestral wisdom of his forebears with the modern vision of global business. His face, with marked features and penetrating dark eyes, rarely showed emotion. He had learned from a young age that in the business world, vulnerability was a luxury he could not afford. That early morning he was returning from a meeting that had extended into absurd hours. Negotiations with Asian investors who didn't understand the concept of reasonable schedules. Karim was exhausted, his tie loosened and the first buttons of his white shirt undone, a detail that for him represented the maximum level of personal disorder. His regular driver had fallen ill, so for the first time in years, he was driving his own vehicle through the city streets. That's when he saw her. At first he thought it was a bundle of abandoned clothing at the bus stop, but something in the shape, in the way the wind slightly moved that heap, made his foot instinctively press the brake. The Mercedes stopped with a soft purr a few meters from the stop. Karim narrowed his eyes, trying to distinguish better in the dimness. It was a girl. A small girl, curled up on the metal bench of the stop, sleeping with her head resting on a worn backpack that seemed to contain all her belongings. She wore a coat too large for her, probably from some adult, and her small hands were tucked inside the sleeves as if desperately seeking warmth. Her lips had a bluish tint that even from a distance was alarming. Karim remained motionless for several seconds, his hands still on the steering wheel. His rational mind told him to call the police, not to get involved, that he had an important meeting in 5 hours and needed to sleep. But something deeper, something that had remained dormant in his chest for decades, began to awaken. He turned off the engine and got out of the vehicle. The cold hit him immediately, making him understand with greater clarity the gravity of the situation. If he, with his Italian cashmere coat, felt that penetrating cold, what must that creature be feeling with barely a worn coat? He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her if she woke. Now he could see her better. She would be about 7 or 8 years old, he calculated. Her face, despite being dirty and with marks of dried tears on her cheeks, possessed an almost ethereal delicacy. Her dark, tangled hair fell over her shoulders in rebellious strands. She slept with a furrowed brow, as if even in dreams she found no peace. "Little one," Karim called softly, crouching beside her. "Little one, wake up." The girl didn't move. Karim extended his hand and gently touched her shoulder. She was frozen. A shiver of alarm ran down his spine. He touched her forehead and confirmed his worst fears. Her skin was cold as marble. Without thinking twice, Karim removed his coat and wrapped the girl in it. Then, with a gentleness he didn't know he possessed, he lifted her in his arms. She weighed so little that for a moment he feared it was too late. But then he felt her breathing, shallow but steady, against his chest. He quickly carried her to the Mercedes and settled her in the back seat, turning the heat up to maximum. Only then did the girl begin to move, her eyelids trembling as she struggled to open her eyes. "Where?" she murmured in a hoarse voice, and then, seeing Karim, her eyes opened completely, filled with terror. "No! Let me go!" She tried to pull back, but she was so weak she could barely move. Karim raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Calm down, little one. I'm not going to hurt you. You were sleeping in the cold. You could have died." "I don't care," she responded with a fierceness that contrasted with her fragility. "Let me go back." "Go back where? To freeze at a bus stop?" Karim kept his voice calm, though inside he felt a mixture of frustration and concern. "Where are your parents?" The question fell like a stone in still water. The girl's face transformed, and for a moment, Karim saw such deep pain in those childish eyes that he felt as if he'd been struck in the chest. "I don't have parents," she finally said, with a voice so empty it was more terrifying than if she had screamed. "I don't have anyone." Karim remained silent. In his world of business meetings, corporate mergers, and market strategies, there was always a solution, a plan B, a way to solve problems. But facing this girl, with her raw pain and absolute loneliness, he found himself completely disarmed. "What's your name?" he finally asked. The girl looked at him with distrust for a long moment before responding. "Layla." "Layla," Karim repeated, and the name sounded strangely familiar on his lips, like an echo of something forgotten. "I'm Karim. And right now, Layla, we're going to go to a warm place where you can eat something hot. Then we'll decide what to do. Okay?" "Why?" she asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. "Why do you care?" It was a simple question, but Karim realized he didn't have a simple answer. Why did he care? He had passed by dozens of homeless people in his life, had donated millions to charitable organizations, but always from the safe distance of his privileged world. What did this girl have that had pierced through all his defenses in a matter of minutes? "Because no one should sleep in the cold," he finally responded. "And because something tells me our meeting is not by chance." He didn't know why he had said that. He wasn't a man given to believing in destiny or mystical signs. But in that moment, looking at Layla wrapped in his cashmere coat, he felt the inexplicable certainty that his life had just changed course. He drove to a 5-star hotel that his company owned in the city center. The night concierge, accustomed to the eccentricities of VIP guests, barely blinked when Karim entered carrying a dirty and disheveled girl. Within minutes, they had a suite prepared, with clean clothes they had obtained from who knows where, and a doctor on the way. Layla had remained quiet during the entire journey, observing everything with huge, cautious eyes, like a wild animal that doesn't quite trust human kindness. When Karim set her down on the suite's sofa, she curled up in a corner, clutching her backpack as if it were the only real thing in a world of dreams. The doctor arrived 20 minutes later. He was an older man with round glasses and a kind expression that immediately seemed to calm Layla a bit. After a thorough examination, the doctor met with Karim in the adjoining room. Mild hypothermia, severe malnutrition, dehydration, the doctor enumerated with a grave expression. "She has bruises on her arms and legs, some recent, others older. This girl has been living on the street for weeks, maybe months. She needs continuous medical attention, proper nutrition, and frankly, she needs someone to take care of her." "Is she in immediate danger?" Karim asked. "No, if she receives appropriate care from now on." "But Mr. Al-Rashid, I must ask you, what is your relationship with this girl? Should I call social services?" Karim stood looking out the window, toward the city lights that were beginning to awaken with the dawn. Social services. Orphanages. The system. He knew how it worked. Layla would become a number, a file, would pass from temporary home to temporary home until she turned 18, and they threw her into the world without any preparation. "No," he finally said, surprising himself with the firmness of his voice. "I will take care of her." The doctor looked at him with evident surprise. "Mr. Al-Rashid, do you understand what that implies? It's not simply giving her a place to sleep. This girl needs stability, constant attention, probably psychological therapy." "I understand," Karim interrupted. "And I'm prepared to provide all of that." Was he really? He had no idea. But as he returned to the room where Layla waited, now clean and dressed in new clothes that still fit her large, he knew there was no turning back. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Karim canceled meetings, postponed business trips, and for the first time in his career, put something above his company. He hired the best lawyers to initiate the adoption process, nutritionists to design a feeding plan for Layla, child psychologists specialized in trauma. But more important than all of that, he spent time with her. At first, Layla was like a ghost in his enormous penthouse. She moved silently through the rooms, barely touching things, as if she feared everything would disappear at any moment. She didn't speak unless asked a direct question, and her answers were cautious monosyllables. "Karim, accustomed to solving problems with efficiency and speed, found himself completely lost. How did one connect with a traumatized girl? How did one earn the trust of someone who had learned that the world was a cruel and dangerous place? One night, a week after finding her, Karim was working in his study when he heard a noise. He went out and found Layla in the kitchen, trying to reach a glass on a high shelf. She was on tiptoes on a chair, stretching dangerously. "Layla, get down from there," he said, and his voice came out more brusque than he intended due to the fright. The girl startled, lost her balance, and began to fall. Karim ran and caught her just in time. For a moment, they remained like that, with Layla in his arms, both breathing heavily. And then, to his surprise, he felt her begin to tremble, not from cold, but from crying. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. I'm sorry. I didn't want to bother you. Please, don't send me back to the street. I promise to be good. I promise not to cause problems." Karim's heart broke in that moment. He realized that Layla had been walking on eggshells, terrified of making a mistake that would make him change his mind about caring for her. He sat on the kitchen floor, still holding her, and for the first time in decades, allowed his own emotions to flow freely. "Layla, look at me," he said softly, waiting until she raised her tearful eyes. "You're not going back to the street. Never. No matter what you do, no matter what mistakes you make. This is your home now. You are my family." The words came out before he could think them through, but the moment he said them, he knew they were true. This girl, who had appeared in his life in the most unexpected way, had become something precious to him. "Really?" Layla whispered, with such fragile hope in her voice that Karim had to swallow the lump in his throat. "Really," he confirmed. "I promise you." It was a turning point. Slowly, like a flower opening to the sun after a long winter, Layla began to open up. She started asking questions, exploring the penthouse with curiosity instead of fear. She began to smile, shyly at first, then more frequently. Karim learned to be a father on the fly. He learned that business meetings could wait when Layla had a nightmare and needed someone to console her. He learned that financial reports were less important than helping her with her math homework. He learned that success wasn't measured only in profit figures, but in the laughter of a girl who had forgotten how to laugh. 3 months after finding her, Layla told him her story. They were sitting on the penthouse balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. Layla had been unusually quiet that day, and Karim had learned not to pressure her, to wait until she was ready to talk. "My parents died in a car accident," she finally began, with a small voice. "I was 6 years old. We had no other family, so they took me to an orphanage." She paused, and Karim waited patiently. At first it wasn't so bad. But then they sent me to a foster home, the Martinez family. They weren't good people, Karim. They made me work all day. They locked me in the basement when I made mistakes. They didn't give me enough food. Karim felt a cold, controlled fury grow in his chest, but kept his expression neutral, knowing that Layla needed to tell her story without interruptions. "One day, Mrs. Martinez hit me because I broke a plate by accident. She hit me so hard that I thought I was going to die. That night I waited until everyone was asleep and I escaped. I had been on the street for weeks when you found me." Tears were flowing freely down her cheeks now, and Karim drew her to him, hugging her tightly. "Never again," he said with a firm voice. "Never again will you be alone. Never again will you be afraid. I swear it by everything I am." And he kept his promise. The months turned into a year. The adoption process was long and complicated, full of bureaucracy and endless evaluations. But Karim, accustomed to negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, applied the same iron determination to ensuring that Layla would legally become his daughter. During that time, both changed. Layla flourished in ways Karim never would have imagined. She turned out to be brilliant in school, especially in mathematics and science. She had a natural talent for drawing and spent hours filling notebooks with sketches of everything she saw. But more than that, she recovered her capacity to trust, to love, to simply be a child. Karim also changed. The man who had been defined solely by his business success discovered that there was a completely new dimension of life he had been ignoring. He learned the value of small things, shared breakfast before school, pajama movies on Friday nights, conversations about everything and nothing while they prepared dinner together. His staff noticed the change. His executive assistant commented that he smiled more. His business partners observed that although he remained brilliant and effective, he now had a warmth he hadn't possessed before. Some criticized him, saying he had gone soft. Karim paid them no attention. He had discovered something more valuable than any contract or acquisition. He had discovered unconditional love. A year and a half after that cold early morning, the judge finally pronounced the words Karim had been waiting for. The adoption is official. Layla Al-Rashid, welcome to your new family. Layla, now 9 years old, cried with happiness. Karim, the powerful CEO who had negotiated with presidents and prime ministers without showing emotion, also cried. That night, they celebrated at home with a small party. Karim had invited the few people who truly mattered. His assistant, who had become a kind of aunt to Layla. The doctor who had examined her that first night. The psychologist who had worked with her for months, and some of Layla's classmates who had become her friends. As he watched Layla laugh and play with her friends, Karim reflected on how a single decision, a moment of compassion on a cold early morning, had completely transformed his life. He had built a business empire, had accumulated wealth beyond the imaginable, had achieved everything that society defined as success. But none of that compared to the joy of seeing Layla happy and safe. Later, when the guests had left and Layla was ready for bed, she hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. And it was the first time she had used that word. Karim felt his heart expand in his chest, so full of love it almost hurt. "Thank you," he responded. "You saved me as much as I saved you." And it was true. Before Layla, Karim had been living a life of empty success, surrounded by luxuries but fundamentally alone. She had taught him that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or properties, but in human connections, in shared love, in the capacity to make a real difference in someone's life. The years passed. Layla grew and became a remarkable young woman. She inherited Karim's intelligence and determination, but also possessed a compassion and empathy that came from having known suffering. At 16, she founded a non-profit organization dedicated to helping homeless children, using her own experience to make a difference. Karim supported her every step of the way, proud beyond words. Together, they transformed part of his business empire to focus on social causes. They built shelters, funded educational programs, created opportunities for children who, like Layla had no one. On the 10th anniversary of that cold early morning, Karim and Layla, now 18 years old, returned to the bus stop where they had met. It was a ritual they had begun years before, a way to remember where they came from and how far they had come. "Do you ever regret it?" Layla asked as they sat on the same bench where Karim had found her. "Picking me up that night. Your life was simpler before me." Karim looked at her with genuine surprise. "Layla, before you, I didn't have a life. I had an existence. I had success and wealth, but I was completely empty inside. You gave me purpose. You gave me love. You gave me a reason to be better than I was." "I was just a scared girl sleeping in the cold," she said softly. "You were, are, and always will be much more than that," Karim responded. "You are my daughter. You are my heart. And finding you was the best moment of my life." They embraced as the sun set over the city, father and daughter, united not by blood but by something much stronger. Unconditional love, and the conscious decision to be family. The story of Karim and Layla spread over time. The media called it the CEO's fairy tale, but those who knew them knew it was much more than that. It was a story about compassion, about seeing beyond appearances, about having the courage to completely change your life for someone who needs it. It inspired others. Businessmen began to get more actively involved in social causes. Families considered adoption. People who passed by the homeless began to see them as human beings with stories, not as invisible problems. But for Karim and Layla, it was never about inspiring others or creating a movement. It was simply about two lonely souls who found each other at the exact moment when both needed it. Years later, when Layla graduated from university with honors and began working alongside Karim in the company, now reoriented toward corporate social responsibility, he reflected on that cold early morning that had changed everything. He had been a sultan in the business world, powerful and respected, but fundamentally incomplete. A girl sleeping at a bus stop had taught him the most important lesson of his life: that true power doesn't come from wealth or status, but from the capacity to love and be loved, to make a real difference in another person's life. A small dream, that of a girl who only wanted to be safe and warm, had awakened a great heart that didn't know it had the capacity to love so deeply. And in that awakening, both had found their home. 25 years after that cold early morning, Karim Al-Rashid, now 67 years old, sat in his office looking at the framed photograph on his desk. It was of Layla on her wedding day, radiant in her white dress, hugging him with a smile that illuminated the entire image. Now she had her own family. 2 children who called Karim grandfather, with voices full of love. The organization she had founded had helped thousands of homeless children find families and opportunities. The legacy they had built together would continue long after both were gone. Karim smiled, gently touching the photograph. He had lived an extraordinary life, full of achievements that many could only dream of. But if asked what his greatest success had been, his answer would always be the same: stopping that cold early morning and seeing not a problem, but an opportunity. Seeing not a homeless girl, but his daughter waiting to be found. A small dream had awakened a great heart, and that heart had changed the world, one life at a time.